Welcome to Daily Entrepreneur. Ka lebitso ke Karabo wa ka Malapile, and this is the SME Solution series. Today we are talking about higher education, and we all know the famous phrase that says education is the key to success. We are going to unpack that today, and we really want to know, is education still the key to success or things have changed? To talk more about this, I'm joined by Mr. Duncan Park from MANCOSA. MANCOSA is a management college of Southern Africa. They are the leading accredited higher education institution in our country. They specializes in affordable and accredited postgraduate, undergraduate business management qualifications in distance and online learning. The purpose of this conversation is to create awareness, it is to educate and to raise an issue. At the end of this conversation, this is what we will know. Does higher education guarantee career success or does it involve? Welcome to Daily Entrepreneur.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing?
Really, really good. Very happy to be here.
I'm very glad to have you here. So happy to have you here. So you are a registrar at MANCOSA.
Correct.
Can you please tell me and our viewers what your role is at MANCOSA?
So effectively, a registrar oversees the admissions and selections process for students who apply to register at the institution. And then in addition to that, a large part of the job is effectively managing and maintaining student records, coordinating, sort of being the touch point between alumni and their records if they request transcripts and things like that. And then I'm also the custodian of the institution's governance structure and all those fun things like student disciplinary matters and escalated grievances and appeals. That's something that my office has to handle. But yeah, it's a really, really rewarding and actually quite an enjoyable job.
Sounds like a cool job that you have.
I don't know if it's cool, but I enjoy it, yeah.
Okay. I mean, working with people is cool. Dealing with people who strive for education, I think it's pretty cool.
It is, yeah.
Do you ever give career advices for people who says, I want to study business, I don't know which fields to like really get into, but all I want is to have a qualification?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily personally give a lot of advice of that particular nature. Okay. We get a lot of applicants, and we're sitting at around 40,000 students. Okay. So there's a lot of people. And we have a large enrollments team, and there's people who work in that team who are student advisors, and they can give that sort of guidance to students. Okay. But if I do sort of encounter someone and they have questions, I'm always happy to provide my perspective. At the end of the day, people need to make that decision for themselves. Mm-hmm. But I think that, what we can do and what I can do is, give you the information so that you can make an informed decision.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Great. So we are talking about higher education today, and we are so happy to have MANCOSA to have this conversation with. And I think one of the biggest question that we want an answer from, or we want an answer to, is, does higher education guarantee career success, or does it need to involve, especially in the entrepreneurial space?
So I think that guarantee is probably too generous of a word.
Okay.
And I think that, we live in quite a unique context in South Africa.
Sure.
We have an abnormally high unemployment rate.
Yeah.
And in as much as, at the State of the Nation address, things like organized crime and that are pitched as the biggest problems the country faces, you'll find the root cause of most of those problems is unemployment.
Sure.
That's what pushes people to criminal activity, and also places a lot of resources under stress in that. And nobody wants to be unemployed. It's sort of a scourge.
Economy. No one wants to
exactly.
Working. Yeah.
So education, it can't necessarily guarantee you employment, or it can't necessarily guarantee that you'll be a successful entrepreneur. But what's always useful in a discussion like this is to look at the statistics, look at the data. And if we look especially, at South Africans sort of under the age of 30, if you look at the data for those students or those people under the age of 30 who have obtained a qualification post-school, so a higher certificate, a diploma, a degree, some sort of formal qualification post-school, their unemployment rate sits at around 9 to 12%, depending on where you're looking at your stats, which is, from a global perspective, still very high. But comparatively, in that same age bracket for people who do not have any post-school training or have no formal qualifications, the unemployment rate there is, closer to sort of 40% to 50%. We often get told, youth unemployment sitting at 50%, and that is primarily people who have not had the opportunity or the access to study post-school. So from a statistical point of view, it's really clear that you are effectively 4 times more likely to succeed in finding employment or becoming an entrepreneur if you do have a post-school qualification. Yeah. So not a guarantee, but it's definitely an enabling factor that can help you. 100%.
Sure. Why do adaptability, problem solving, and the resilience often outweighs the prestige qualification of education when it comes to people who want to get into business or entrepreneurs?
So those sorts of characteristics, things like adaptability and resilience and problem solving, those are skills that are not necessarily tied to a particular academic field. So it's not something where it's like, if you go and you study marketing, you're going to learn those skills. Or if you study, to become a teacher, but at the same time, I think qualifications have evolved quite a bit so that they are, and certainly at MANCOSA, while the subject matter and the knowledge you learn is important, there's a much greater focus on kind of the attributes that graduates walk away with.
Sure.
So there's a lot to talk about here. If you'll allow me to ramble on a little bit.
Please go ahead.
So the world has changed significantly in the last sort of, actually realistically 40 years or so. So historically, pre-industrial revolution, it was all about physical quotient, like how strong you were. Were you able to farm and grow food? And that was the key characteristic and attribute of a person that would kind of guarantee their success.
Sure.
And, the vast majority of jobs right up until as late as sort of the 1950s in developed countries were still physical for men in particular, building, agriculture, things like that. But that's all been entirely mechanized now.
Yeah.
And that was when you saw suddenly this huge focus on IQ in, like your intelligence quotient or whatever.
Yeah.
Because in a world where everything is mechanized, it was very much about if you had the knowledge or not, that would become your success enabler. But then with the advent of the internet in particular, the phrase is that knowledge has been democratized. So it used to be you would go and study a qualification to have access to knowledge that was sort of held by universities and institutions. And now that knowledge is freely available to everyone on your phone, in your pocket.
So you can buy a book and get knowledge from there. Yeah.
So knowledge is no longer the value proposition that education offers. And given this world that we live in now, you'll see everyone's always talking about how the kind of pace of life, the pace of of business has increased, and there's sort of a growing expectation for people to have like side hustles and have multiple kind of activities going on, and the world has become more complex. Knowledge is no longer kind of the currency it used to be, but what is now very much so the currency is your EQ, your emotional quotient, because the people who succeed now are the people who can kind of balance the demands of this fast-paced world that we live in.
Yeah.
And exactly those characteristics that you were asking about, adaptability, resilience, problem solving, that's not knowledge-based. That's very much so about your inner emotional quotient that you have. And so studying a qualification, whilst the subject matter is still important, I don't want to undervalue that component of it. It teaches you a lot of skills. It demonstrates to me, if I see someone who's got a degree or has even pursued postgraduate studies, it demonstrates to me that they are able to dedicate themselves and focus on something and succeed at it. Less so do I focus on what specifically the academic content of what you learned is, but by having achieved that, it shows me that you were able to achieve something. You were able to commit yourself to something. And in doing so, I would expect that you had to be resilient.
Sure.
You had to, push through those exams, those essays, or whatever it is. Problem solving, exactly. And so I think that it's a very sort of conscious and deliberate choice at MANCOSA, and I think at a lot of institutions, that we recognize that knowledge isn't the currency that we deal in anymore. It's these sorts of characteristics and attributes. So I agree that those attributes are actually now more important than knowledge. But at the same time, institutions are a means of kind of growing and developing those attributes, and also a means of demonstrating that you have those attributes.
So then how do you bridge that gap, with someone who is skillful, but then you need to bring the knowledge into it? With someone that says, I have the skills, but I'm not really knowledgeable when it comes to the platform that I want to get into. How do you bridge that gap, from school theory to then someone who just comes with the skills?
Yeah, so there's a phrase in education now. I don't think it's just isolated to education, but in corporate world as well, which is lifelong learning.
Yeah.
So like I was saying, we recognize now that the world and the pace of change is so rapid. So for example, like if you did an IT qualification in 2010, it's totally irrelevant content at this point.
It doesn't apply anymore.
None of the knowledge you learned then, it really exists and is relevant still today. And that's, consistent across the board. If you go and you study and you specialize in taxation, every year tax laws change, tax rates change, VAT changes. All of these things are constantly changing. So no matter what your career is nowadays, if you're in the media, I think that, legacy media feels very under threat because of other kind of platforms and things, and if you look at how kind of contemporary politicians have harnessed social media in ways that the legacy media never had enabled them previously. I'm digressing, but effectively, everything is moving so quickly that we do have to keep up with those changes and developments. And I think that there's a number of ways of doing that. One is just staying informed in your sector, staying connected, keeping your finger on the pulse. And then the other is through things like short courses, upskilling courses and things like that. And we do offer quite a few of those. And they are, to me, I shouldn't be surprised, but I see them as surprisingly popular. People really, really, I think, prefer smaller little courses for certain contexts, because they don't necessarily have a year to commit to a diploma, postgraduate diploma or something like that, So those sorts of short courses are a way of obtaining that knowledge. And of course, formal qualifications are as well. But really, I think the onus is on us now as individuals. If we don't keep up with the knowledge, then we're going to get left behind.
Because the reason why I'm asking that, Mr. Duncan, is that you get someone maybe who's watching this episode and he's a mechanic, he's very good with using his hands. But to run a business, you need to have knowledge on how to run a business. So sometimes people don't know that I cannot just run a mechanical workshop without knowledge of how to run business, how to apply for tax, or how to, to make sure that your books are in order.
Yeah.
One other question that I want you to answer for us, what can institutions like MANCOSA do to get graduates work ready, opposed to just being like, once you get a job, you still need extensive retraining? Because we see a lot of graduates who want to get into the, the market, and the first thing that they will ask, where have you worked before? I don't have qualifications. I do have qualifications. I don't have experience. How can institutions like MANCOSA make sure that they are work ready and don't need extensive retraining?
Yeah, so there were quite a few embedded questions there that I'll start with the mechanic side, and then I'll talk about work readiness, right? So I call it the mechanic side. That's just the example you used. So there are specific qualifications for people that are exactly in that sort of a situation where you're in a particular industry, you've grown to a certain level now, you've employed staff, you have certain labor law obligations, you have certain tax obligations, you have all of these sorts of things. And really that whole world generally is called business administration. Yeah. And then, of course, there is the famous MBA qualification, the Master of Business Administration, and you have a postgraduate diploma of business administration, and you have a Bachelor of Business Administration. And so those programs, and the MBA in particular, is very much so geared towards, you're not studying this necessarily to become an academic, a researcher. You're studying this so that you can get a sort of broad-based knowledge and expertise in the various different functions of running a business, statistics, things like entrepreneurship, how do you register a company, all of those sorts of things.
Payroll, how are you going to be able to pay people that works for you? Yeah.
So there are qualifications that are specifically for people in that kind of a context. So I just wanted to say that first of all. Okay. The second part, where you're talking about work readiness, so there's kind of a multi-layered approach to ensuring that graduates are work ready. The one hand is in your qualifications, of course. You need to be, as an academic institution like MANCOSA, we have an obligation to ensure that our program content is fit for purpose and is relevant, and that we are constantly, reviewing and updating and moving with the progressions of time and industry. Sure. So really importantly there is that you have to also have those sorts of ties and connections with industry. So you'll have in an institution, various kind of committee structures and things where people who are external to the institution, part of industry, and also really importantly, part of community as well. Because community is where you understand the kind of need that you're serving. Sure. They need to be active participants with education, education providers.
There's a gap in the market for what you are studying for.
Correct. They said we need this in our community. Yeah. So in somewhere like Durban, where MANCOSA is, it's right on the harbor. Okay. So,
that was such a great idea.
So
big up to you guys.
So a huge part of our offerings is like supply chain and logistics and things like that, because in that specific physical community that institution exists as a part, there's a massive need for this, and there's a huge demand for it. Now, of course, we've grown and we're in other parts of the country and we're online, so you can study with us from anywhere. But even so, you still have to maintain those connections and those ties with community, with industry. So many industry experts will come and tell you, your graduates, they're coming, and then we have to immediately teach them to do X, Y, Z. You need to be teaching them that in your qualifications so that when they come out, I know if they're going to be auditors, or they're going to be kind of working with risk management or something, that they will know, okay, I need to create a risk register, I need to do XYZ. They have those skills. So that's the one part. That's the curriculum part of the programs you offer. But that's often not enough, because like you say, you can exit and you've got a qualification, but everyone wants to see your experience.
Yeah, you're not employable.
So there, I can only speak to what MANCOSA has in place, which is we have a career center.
Sure.
We have an employability mandate as an institution, where we have, through this career center, and actually very much so through our alumni as well, so graduates of MANCOSA who work in various industries, remain in contact with us. They remain connected with us, and they help us with placements, with things like learnerships for people who studied with us, and with various career opportunities. So people who study with MANCOSA, while they are students, they can engage with this career center. It also offers services like assisting you put together a CV, assisting you with interview etiquette, things like that. Those sorts of soft skills, which may not necessarily be part of the curriculum that you're studying. So it can help them with that. But most valuable is the connection it has with partners in industry. And it can provide kind of a direct conduit. There's no guarantee of employment, but it can get your CV in the hands of the relevant people, people who may have even done your qualification, alumni who are working and have that understanding of, okay, this person's undertaken this qualification. I know what they're going to be capable of. And we do have a vacancy available. So there are structures specifically for this exact need that you're talking about. And I think that's an obligation that all institutions
need to do that.
I think most of them are doing it.
That's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah, and it really is an obligation that if you work in education, you shouldn't be in an ivory tower. You really need to be connected to industry, to community, and you really need to be connecting your students to that as well. So I think that's a huge obligation we have. And especially in the context of South Africa and our unemployment rates, it's vital.
It is. Do you get more applications from postgraduate or undergraduate? Because sometimes when you look at MANCOSA and what they offer, you find that someone is already working, they just want to further their studies and then gain more knowledge in the industry that they're in. So do you get more applications with undergraduate or with postgraduate?
We get a good mix, but we do, I would say, get more undergraduate. There's a huge demand for entry into higher education. And so one of our kind of most popular program types, and we have a number of them, are higher certificates. So often, people will matriculate and they won't necessarily get a degree pass. A higher certificate, but they'll have a higher certificate pass. And the higher certificate can then be used as kind of an articulation pathway to enter the higher education sector and then progress from that onto other qualifications. So that's a very popular one. And the higher certificate by nature is also quite skills oriented. So it can equip you with skills, bookkeeper, whatever the specific higher certificate you do is. It'll be to a degree skills based so that you're ready for work, not necessarily managerial level.
But you will get an entry job.
But you can get an entry job. Or should you find, I may have perhaps not been as diligent in matric, but I actually have a taste for this academia thing, and then you can use it as a pathway to progress in your studies. And for me, this is a really important point, because so often I feel like people in higher education think of education, in the admissions process specifically, they want applicants who are already exceptional, who already have the most amazing results.
That's not always the case.
And for me, the real value of higher education is finding the people who are not currently exceptional. And giving them an opportunity to become exceptional. And that's for me is like the most important achievement in education. You know, it's fine and well, somebody comes along, they've got all their A's and everything, and and effectively then, you know, allowing them to admit and get their distinction, it's kind of validating their exceptionalism, which is good.
Sure.
But for me, the student who just sort of scraped through may have had really difficult circumstances at home. We have a lot of social troubles in South Africa. Addiction is a huge issue. There are all kinds of social issues that people face, and that impacts your performance at school. That can impact your academic performance. And for me, that shouldn't be something that then results in you not having the opportunity to study.
Sure.
And I think that's why our higher certificates for me are something that I personally am very invested in, because it's the gateway. You know, we want to widen access to education, and programs like that are how you achieve that.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really great. So now let's tie entrepreneurship into higher learning and lifelong learning. So, you know, you get a lot of business people or entrepreneurs who move across industries. Or they get into different roles. How can they stay relevant, you know, with lifelong learning? How can they remain competitive and innovative?
So, you know, it's such a difficult question to answer, because no two entrepreneurs look the same. You know, entrepreneurship by nature is, you know, you're finding a gap that exists and you're filling that gap and you're succeeding in it, you know.
Sure.
And so no one's going to look identical. But that being said, I think that, you know, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I know and who we also have connections with, you know, from an institutional point of view, are some of the most remarkably studious people I've ever met in my life. You know, and I'm not just talking, I'm not here to just advertise MANCOSA. You know, a lot of the guys I know, they take advantage of things like, you know, you've got Harvard, who have online free courses available to the world. And that's one of the best institutions there is. You know, there's so many different institutions that have online offerings today. MANCOSA is indeed one of them, but there are many others.
It's there.
And getting that kind of diversity of thought, because the kinds of skills and thinking that, you know, a USA-based university imparts is very different to the kinds of, you know, attributes that a South African-based institution provides. Neither is necessarily better. One may be more relevant for certain contexts and things like that. But I think that what entrepreneurs, the really successful ones, they're people who are really good at understanding different perspectives, because they understand needs, they understand demands, they understand how to meet those needs. And so to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be able to hold multiple perspectives at once and kind of figure out what to do in order to kind of meet the needs of all of these different perspectives. And kind of continuous engagement with studies and with thought leaders and with institutions that are kind of built around this is like it's like a priceless way to foster those sorts of skills. But I think, you know, when it comes to entrepreneurship, something that does annoy me is we often latch onto stories again of exceptionalism and try and treat it like a blueprint that anyone can follow.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's always like, oh, you know, Mark Zuckerberg, he dropped out of Harvard.
I can do the same.
I can, exactly.
It doesn't
work like that. The reason his story is so remarkable is because out of 8 billion people, he's the only one that happened to and then built a social media empire, you know.
Sometimes it's about luck, I think. Sometimes
Hugely.
it's about luck. Yeah.
And I think that's where resilience comes in, because most entrepreneurs, and you know, I'm sure you've interviewed or are going to interview many entrepreneurs, but most of them will admit, you know, I started 10 businesses, 8 failed.
Sure.
You know, 2 are succeeding now. And it's that recognition of the fact that there is a huge luck component to it. But the more you do it, the more statistically likely you are to ultimately succeed.
And those are famous stories, of more businesses that were built and only few of them are thriving. And it happens across industries with people in different roles,
100%. A really famous example, before I know that I'm probably going over time here, but a really famous example, and people often laugh if you say this, is, Colonel Sanders, the KFC man.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was 62 when he founded KFC.
Yeah.
He had spent a huge part of his adult life living in his car. Like, he didn't have a house. In his 60s, he started KFC, which is one of the biggest corporations in the world today.
Yeah.
So, entrepreneurship is also not something that's just for the young. And he never would have achieved that had he not had that kind of resilience and adaptability and kept pushing in his 60s, you know.
And I think just to add on to that, with people, especially in our generations, we are quick to get results, and I think we can be more resilient. We need to push through. I mean, yes, entrepreneurship is something to desire. Yes, starting my own business and not having to work under someone, it is desirable. But I think we miss the part where you need to be resilient. We miss the part where some of the things you will have to work 10 times better than the next person or work harder and for so many years before you get to that point.
I often unironically refer back to that video that was on like TikTok or social media.
Yeah.
That guy Demi, tough times never last. Only tough people last.
Do. And that's so true.
That is wisdom. It is so priceless wisdom that tough times are going to happen, but they're not going to last forever.
They're not going to last. You need to push through.
And if you want to last, you sometimes you have to tough it out.
That's okay.
And there's like a lot of focus with entrepreneurship that you need motivation and you need this and you do need motivation, but more importantly, I think you need discipline. Because there's going to be days where you're not feeling motivated.
But work has to go on. The show must go on.
And discipline is the thing that'll get you through those times,
Yeah.
But those are some thoughts from my side.
Okay. All right. So in what ways can higher education, be used as a career accelerator for people who wants to get into SMEs or start their own business?
So, I think some of the things I've already spoken about, things like MBA qualifications that are specifically for people who want to start businesses, who want to expand their capabilities across kind of the various functions of business administration. I think that's a really, really, really important accelerator, a hugely important part of success as an entrepreneur is also your networking. Studying, you're going to meet people who are interested in the same things. You're going to meet people who may want to partner with you, and you can build your network. Not necessarily guaranteed. And again, like we were saying, there's a lot of luck in it. You might find in your cohort of students that you're studying with, people that are very like-minded, and you can grow. So there's a number of those sorts of channels. And then, like I said, there's also the kind of career center networking opportunities. There's mentorship opportunities at institutions. So there's a number of different ways that a higher education institution, and MANCOSA in particular, can kind of accelerate your path to becoming an entrepreneur.
So what I'm hearing from you is that there is a need for relationship between higher institutions and industry people.
Big need. It has to be. If there is no connection between a higher education institution, industry, and community, it's those three spheres.
Sure.
If you are a higher education institution that doesn't engage with industry and the community that you're a part of, you are redundant, you are irrelevant, and you are adding no value to society.
To society.
Yeah, exactly. So the value you add is entirely dependent on your relationship and your connection with industry and community. You need to be meeting industry's needs. You need to be meeting the community's needs. And also industry and community have a lot to offer to higher education institutions as well. You know, there's a lot that we should be learning from industry, a lot of innovations, a lot of kind of breakthroughs. They don't happen in a research center in a university necessarily. They happen in industry where people are working with that every day and innovations take place. And that in turn will become part of a curriculum.
Yeah.
So there's like a two-way dialogue always, you know. And I think that it's really important that institutions and, you know, higher education institutions work to deliberately build those sorts of relationships. Yeah.
Is that something that you guys take pride in at MANCOSA, to say we are not just teaching people to have a knowledge, but a skill? Like, you know, some of these institutions, you get people from an industry to come and teach in a with a particular subject.
Master classes, like
you get that. You get someone, for example, 100%. Who works at JSE to come and be a lecturer for a specific business course. Is that something that you guys take pride in?
Definitely. And I think where we really have really strong structures where industry participate is in our curriculum development and review division. So in that division, you know, there are multiple structures where effectively every single curriculum developed and offered by MANCOSA has been rigorously reviewed by industry experts. They have contributed to its development. They have come and sat at the institution with us, looked at the content, looked at what the outcomes are, and have really guided us in what their needs are, and also have, I hope, have also kind of taken a lot of value themselves from those sorts of engagements. But it's really, you know, and that's a foundational level, you know, that's the curriculum. And if industry have a significant hand or, you know, input in developing your curricula that you offer, you're not creating something that isn't necessarily fit for purpose. You've included them from the very start. And I think that's, I think that's somewhere that we really excel.
How can higher education involve in preparing students not just for employment, but for leadership and entrepreneurship?
So it again speaks to those attributes, you know, those graduate attributes and those sort of soft skills that may not necessarily be part of the academic subject matter, but can be part of the curriculum and can be skills that are fostered when a student undertakes a particular qualification with us. And I think that, you know, especially with leadership, so much of it is built around, you know, soft skills, being able to listen to people, not listen to people to respond to them, not listen to them to find gaps in what they're saying, but truly listen to them to understand. You know, that is a really, really undervalued skill. And I think a lot of politicians should also be, you know,
they need that more
take heed there. But those sorts of attributes, like I'm saying, you know, they are increasingly equally important as the subject matter itself. And in leadership and in entrepreneurship, like you said, entrepreneurs, you know, you might be an expert in a particular skill or something, and that could be how you launch your career. But a lot of entrepreneurs are in diverse fields. They have diverse businesses in different spaces. And the way that you tie that all together is through your soft skills. It's through your networking skills. It's through your people skills. It's through your management skills. How do you talk to the people? How do you inspire the people who work for you to take ownership, to kind of achieve to the best of their abilities as well? And you know, there's the core curriculum, but there's so much sort of kind of supplementary opportunity for those skills to be developed when you study, you know, when you engage with your peers. Like a hugely important part of studying is talking to other students. You know, your other students are in the same boat as you. They probably understand you better than your lecturer might understand you, you know. And when you engage with your peers, and if they have questions and you can guide them and they can guide you, that's like, I think, the most effective learning that takes place. And that's also collaboration at play, which again is essential to leadership, to entrepreneurship.
If the real value of higher education, it is the thinking it develops, how can MANCOSA continue to lead the conversation when it comes to employability, entrepreneurship beyond in Africa and beyond?
So, I mean, you used the word conversation.
Yeah.
Like that's so important. Is as an institution, we need to create the platforms for those conversations.
Okay.
And I think that that's something that we do excel at, but it's something that we can continuously improve with as well. And I think that, you know, we do a lot of public sort of engagements. We do a lot of like public lectures, leadership lectures, annual leadership seminars, things like that, which really provide that opportunity for conversation, and a huge part of that conversation often also, in addition to industry, community, the higher education institution, but it's also civil society, your municipalities, your political leaders, your people from government, local government, national government, that sort of thing is really important. So I know like later this year, I think it'll be in around June, July, hasn't necessarily been announced yet, but we'll be having a conference, and there's some significant political figures that will be participating in that conference as well. And speaking, and the whole conversation of that is about quality and relevance in higher education. So they're creating those sorts of platforms so that you're not just engaging with the people who are students, you know, and at the same time you're giving opportunity to people who are students, not part of your core curriculum. You don't have to attend it, but this is happening around you. And again, their success as an entrepreneur and as a leader, it's about what opportunities you seize. So we can create opportunities, but it's up to the individuals to participate.
It's all about. So just in closing, Mr. Duncan, you know, we were speaking about innovation. We're speaking about how things are changing, you know, how today, this is the knowledge you have. 5 years later, you cannot apply what you learned in today's world. Speaking about innovation and collaboration, what is it that we need to do more now to make sure that higher education does guarantee career success?
Very difficult to pin it down to one or two things.
Okay.
I think that communication is so important.
Okay.
And that, I'll be honest with you, that's something that, you know, oftentimes I think all institutions can improve with. How often are there student protests at, you know, public universities and things? And how often, even in the private higher education sector, students are saying, you know, we weren't consulted, you didn't communicate this with us. And I think that communication is a hugely important part of it. If we want to innovate, if we want to be relevant, an important part of that is not leaving people behind. It's not innovating in a vacuum.
Don't leave anyone behind.
You know, there's no point innovating on going to Mars when there's people in your community who don't have water.
Sure.
You know, you've got to be in communication. You've got to be connected so that you go together. You know, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Go together. And the one thing I love about what corporates do these days is the initiative of taking a girl child to work or a boy child to work. And I think it works perfectly also with people who are just graduates to get into these spaces before they can seek employment.
100%.
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was so, you know, insightful, and I really hope that you have learned so much. Yes, the question at the beginning of this conversation was, does higher education guarantee career success? It is difficult, but it's doable. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for joining us on this conversation with Daily Entrepreneur.
Thank you so much for having me.